It is my succinct pleasure to welcome the esteemed Brandon Carson, a very prolific author, a longtime leader in this space, been at many corporate organizations doing some phenomenal philanthropic work with L&D Cares. Take a moment for folks, the few that don't know you, maybe kind of your current role and a little bit about where you're spending your time these days, Brandon.
Yep, so spending my days at Walmart, Vice President of Learning and Leadership for the US. Right now, and what we're trying to do is really focus on offering more equitable opportunity and career growth and all sorts of development for our leaders across the US segment.
Love that. I know that the power of the book that you just came off a book signing and did a wonderful presentation on day 2 here at ATD around the playbook for L&D in the digital age. I thought there were some unbelievably salient points, and I think you had sort of 3 big themes that sort of underpinned these big shifts around, and you check me if I get these right. So it's migration and globalization, the technology tsunami, and then this sort of the third piece around the sort of transformation of kind of workforces and learning.
Yep.
Can you unpack those a bit for folks that might not be as familiar or haven't read the book yet?
No, sure thing. Great call out. So I do talk a lot about those forces. These are the 3 forces driving the digital age, and they're impacting every business, but they're impacting the workforce as well. If you look around migration and globalization, if you look at just in the last 20 years, China has usurped the US quite significantly with globalization, right? And if you look at the supply chain during the pandemic, 75% of our medicines were reliant upon a Chinese supply chain. And so that's okay and everything for the world. We just have to understand that this globalization is here to stay, and it's global. And so as we start to reconstruct our perspective on what the meaning of that is for our businesses, we just have to look at the impact that has on how we do business, and then figure out how we make affordances for that as we move forward. And then the migration part is we're undergoing the largest human migration ever right now.
Back into that urban setting, yes?
Yes, so in 1950, 2/3 of us were in non-urban settings, and by 2050, 2/3 of us will be in urban settings. And this is the largest and quickest migration we've ever done. And that's impacting, along with globalization, how we get our knowledge and how we learn what we do in all of our economies. And so there's a big impact there. And then you factor that in with the technology tsunami, with AI, the cloud, and data, the 3 big technologies that are the driving force behind a lot of the change going on in our businesses. Then something like the pandemic, which is been an accelerant for the change in work that's happening, the rapid transformation of work, and the skills gap that's there from all of that convergence of those technologies. It's a perfect storm for training and HR organizations to deal with. So there's a lot going on there, a lot to unpack, but these are the key drivers that I was trying to get across. Not that we can necessarily do a whole lot about them, but we in L&D and in HR, this is our stage to stand on now to help really transform the workplace and the workforce.
Yeah, and it's so intriguing, the 2 pieces that if we play that forward into sort of how does that translate into L&D, I thought one of the really salient points you make in the book, and you also spoke about a little bit earlier today in your presentation, was the idea of this sort of one size doesn't fit all, and can we come off of this as L&D? It's been, right. I've been in not quite as long as you, but in the space for 2 decades, and that's always been this mentality, and how do we get people to shift off of that, I think was a bit of your call to action.
Yes, it's a very assertive call to action for us to think of a different operating model. So we've been operating under this model for over 50 years as a corporate learning construct, right? And which is fine in some respects, but the fact of the matter is the workforce has shifted and business is shifting, and so we now need a new operating model so that we can be less reactive and more proactive and really help this massive skills gap that's out there right now. And like I said in the presentation earlier, the number 1 focus for any corporate learning organization right now needs to be addressing this skills gap, because it is the most significant we've had. We're in the largest scale job transition ever. And so we've got to be on point.
No doubt. I think some of the data was a bit frightening from WEF of the millions and millions, or 14% of the global workforce fundamentally changing by 2030, as you're recounting. The other piece that I felt as a bit of a cautionary tale for folks was we better be mindful of the degree of this capability and skills gap, lest we create this massive schism and dichotomy. And I think you were framing that as, tell me the two different groups that you were sort of talking about, is the idea of the sort of rote routine work, and then the cognitive, or the physical and the cognitive. Help us with that a little bit.
The skills polarization is what I like to call it, has evolved us into these two worker types. There's the physical worker focused, like you said, on routine tasks, and the cognitive worker more on non-routine tasks. And the gap there, and we talk about this in L&D a lot, about upskilling and reskilling, but what we really need to understand are the nuances between those two. And the gap is quite significant in certain pockets.
No doubt.
And that doesn't mean that we're easily going to be able to upskill or reskill the physical worker. We don't want to leave them behind. And so we need to get real intentional about what we're doing as it applies to that, because it's not a quick fix. No. It's going to take us a while. And one thing I said is, if you're not already thinking about this and putting strategies together,
you're behind
the eight ball a bit.
So it is a bit of that cautionary tale for folks. I know the other piece that really stood out from in both sort of the book and your presentation, Brandon was talking a little bit. You're a big fan of John Hagel and the scalable efficiency model, and you and I share that. And I think you had a brilliant perspective that it should be less about the scalable efficiency model and more about scalable learning. Am I counting that right?
Yes.
Help people understand what that means and why we should be thinking about this as HR talent learning professionals.
Yes. So the work, a lot of our work environments have been constructed for optimal efficiency and productivity. And it made sense during the manufacturing age. That made sense coming out of Fordism in the last century, assembly line. We constructed these work environments to gain that maximum efficiency from the worker.
The optimizing for output solely.
Exactly.
In that sense.
And what the digital age means is a complete paradigm shift to that. That doesn't really matter anymore. What we need to do is have much more worker-centered environments that are conducive to learning, because the skills shift, the shelf life of a skill is pretty small right now.
No doubt.
And granted, we've been talking about this for a while, but it's accelerated even more so with the digital age, but even more so with the pandemic. And so we've got to really start looking wholesale at our work environments, the systems and the physical environments. And we've got to construct more, environments that are more conducive to learning while you're working. And that's a little bit of a shift in our thinking.
I think a massive one.
Yeah, it's a massive shift, and we have to really start thinking architecturally there.
Yeah. So I wonder, can part of that shift be accelerated? Because I thought this was another great point that you made about sort of the elevation of L&D. We've long asked for a seat at the table, and maybe now we're getting more than we bargained for, because it's a hot seat in the spotlight that the pandemic has shown on. And I think your sort of former CEO, in the airline space, talking a lot about this idea of learning must become that key component of a business strategy. So, in the idea of having a CLO now report directly into a CEO, and will we see more of that, do you think, or less? Was that just a flash in the pan, and now we'll go back to this L&D off to the side and siloed, or what's your take?
Well, I think we need bold leadership in the L&D space, right? And we saw a lot of that appear positively through the pandemic, because a lot of L&D organizations were put on the spot, like, you need to help us navigate this pandemic. And so a lot of us were more visible. So I think that's good. And there's a lot of positive coming out of that. Ed from Delta had said, we need to be a learning company, and we need much more development of our people to take us into the future. And you could probably ask any CEO what their concern is when they lay their head on the pillow at night. It's their workforce capability to execute on all of these digital strategies that are happening, because every business has a digital strategy. And so I think you're right. We're going to get that hot seat at the table. Are we bold enough and courageous enough, and do we understand the workforce capability and what we need to do to skill the workforce in the right manner, so that we can talk to senior leaders about the capability they have in their workforce, because they're integrating technology year over year astronomically and exponentially anyway. We've got to be able to have those conversations with our senior leaders to say, yes, you do have the workforce that can execute on this, or no, you don't, and here's the pockets that we need to work on and develop.
And I think that was a big part of the nature of you laying out what was an unbelievably thoughtful and prescriptive playbook. I think you had 10 points in there, helping folks think everything from the nature of the roles and the people they're putting in place to pieces. And you can check my math if I have this right, but I think in sort of step 6 and step 8 about sort of analyzing your tech stack and that, really understanding what do you have in house and is that there to support what you need moving forward, both the technical acumen of the L&D personnel that you've brought in or should be bringing in, as well as the actual technologies that help you execute on those business strategies. So is that?
Yep, spot on. We need technology acumen at every level in L&D, and we need it in different and varying forms across L&D, but we need to have a strong perspective on our learning technology ecosystem and what we need for it to be able to support our audiences, and how we can integrate it more seamlessly into the employee experience. And that's the crucial component over the last several years, is we need to focus more on consumer grade learning experiences, because we have a much savvier workforce than we did before the smartphone, before Steve unleashed that on us. And these folks not only do they need, but they expect these types of experiences. And we need to focus on that.
No doubt. I thought that sort of the compilation of you talking about the shelf life of skills, that 2 to 3 year window, and then I love your point about on the precipice of a 6-decade long sort of tenure for careers, which if there's any 20-somethings out there now, they're frightened that we just scared them that they have to work for the next 60.
Yeah, you're going to be working for 60 years.
But I think that coupled with the idea of the first time in our history, 5 generations in the workforce, there is this expectation now, not just from digital natives, but from maybe all facets, because the consumer grade experience is sort of just in time, just enough, just for me, that we need to be doing better at that as L&D professionals, and candidly all of the vendors here can be doing better about that.
And as we evolve our practice in the L&D space, I think a lot of this will just come to be common to us, to strive for those more cinematic learning experiences, if you will, or the ones that are more meaningful for people. But we're taking the long road round, and it's like we need to start thinking how we can, and it's not even a cost factor, it's how can we start formulating the mindset shift that we need to understand that our workers need this, they need new capabilities, they know that. We're living longer than we've ever lived before. We're going to be working longer. We are going to need to be continuously learning and improving ourselves at work. So how do we build this into the very fabric of the organization so that you are a learning company, like Ed said, from the very DNA, right? And so this isn't just an add-on. It's not like, oh, the LMS is another thing you have to go do. Learning is a part of your expectation here.
No doubt.
And I think we're moving in that direction in a lot of companies, but we need that mindset shift.
It almost harkens back to the little Peter Senge, Fifth Discipline, Art of the Learning Organization from 1995 as we date each other here, where I date myself. I won't include you in that company.
I was there with that,
But there's something deeply powerful about that. Let that be at the start, and sort of the only way to accelerate into and to win out in this space is to sort of put learning first and elevated status, which I think is important.
Spot on.
So we have a scant sort of day left at ATD. If you were to sort of ask another big call to action for all the L&D professionals, executives, folks that are here today, what would you want them sort of putting their laser focus on and elevating to the top of their respective lists as they embark from this time and this time here in Salt Lake and head back to their respective places?
No, that's great. Honestly, I think I don't want to say coming out of the pandemic, but during this because who knows what's going to happen, but during this pandemic, we've had a great opportunity to focus on the humanity of the work. And I think that's a crucial thing for us to understand, that lots of us have had to really pivot and think differently during the last year and a half, but we are probably the only, I don't want to say only, but one of the key parts of the organization. We focus on the people.
Uniquely equipped.
We're uniquely equipped to focus on the people. And I know many of my colleagues have been very strong advocates for more health and wellness, more mental well-being, more relief from the exhaustion of Zoom meetings, all of this kind of thing, because we have to take care of our people.
No doubt.
And so not only do we need to start thinking about a different operating model, different conversations about our value proposition to the business and to the workforce, it's been really nice to see our practice come together and really focus on the people. And so that's what I would say. It's like, it's been a year. I've never had a year like this in my life. I don't think you probably have either.
Right.
None of us probably have. And so coming out of this, we do need to do a little we were there. Yes. We did business continuity. We did not stand down. We were there to help the businesses continue, but more importantly, keep a focus on our workforces and all of that. So I would say take a moment, but then let's also
get back at it.
Get back at it.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't have said that more adeptly. Brandon Carson, can't thank you enough. Appreciate
Thank you.
the time.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure.